Trump is threatening to take Greenland by force. Denmark is scrambling. NATO allies are issuing warnings. And the entire geopolitical establishment is treating this frozen island like the most valuable territory on Earth. But here's what nobody's saying. Actually owning Greenland might be the worst strategic decision America could make. Think about that. Every major power wants control. China's watching, Russia's positioning. The US already has a military base there and unlimited access under a 1951 treaty. Yet Trump insists he needs to own it outright. Why would he risk fracturing NATO, alienating allies, and potentially triggering a constitutional crisis over territory that might actually be a liability? The answer reveals how power actually works, and why the most contested resources are often the least profitable. We're going to follow the money and uncover what's really happening in the Arctic. The military choke point. Let's start with geography. Greenland sits directly between Russia and the United States. The shortest route for a Russian ballistic missile to reach the American mainland goes straight over Greenland and the North Pole. This isn't theoretical. Patuxent Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base, operates 24/7 with 650 personnel monitoring missile threats and space surveillance. It's the Department of Defense's northernmost installation, positioned specifically to detect launches before they reach American cities. But during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was an actual existential threat, the US stationed 10,000 troops at Thule. Today, with Russia and China supposedly expanding in the Arctic, Washington has 200 people there. If Greenland was critical, then why did America abandon it? There's another strategic pressure point, the GIUK gap. That's the corridor connecting Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, the gateway for Russian and Chinese naval vessels, moving between the Arctic and the Atlantic. Washington wants that corridor locked down. In other words, if the US doesn't control Greenland, it can't monitor who's moving through the Arctic. And right now, that's exactly what China and Russia are counting on. Trump's proposed Golden Dome missile defense system requires Greenland as its keystone. Without control of Greenland's airspace and territory, the entire defense architecture falls apart. But here's what makes this even stranger. Most Americans have never heard of this treaty, and Denmark's barely mentioned it in the current crisis. Why would you hide the thing that gives you total leverage? Because if Denmark and Greenland reminded everyone that the US already has unlimited military access, Trump's entire "we need to own it" argument falls apart. What changed? The answer is geopolitics. The Arctic is becoming contested territory. Russia and China are expanding their Arctic capabilities. Joint naval patrols between Moscow and Beijing, new shipping routes opening through melting ice, increased military activity in waters the US thought it controlled. Beijing opened a representation office in Greenland in 2023, exploring investment opportunities in mining and infrastructure. That's not just diplomacy, it's a foothold for future investment and control. That move triggered alarm bells in Washington, not because China was threatening Greenland militarily, but because economic influence often precedes strategic positioning. Denmark's Arctic spending has become a flashpoint. The US criticizes Copenhagen for not doing enough to secure Greenland. Denmark disputes this, pointing to increased naval patrols and surveillance investments. But the real issue isn't Denmark's commitment, it's that Denmark doesn't have the military capacity to match what Washington wants. NATO faces an impossible dilemma. How do you secure Greenland without triggering Article 5 complications if the US decides to act unilaterally? European allies are caught between supporting American security concerns and defending a fellow NATO member's sovereignty. Deploying troops to a NATO ally's territory to stop another NATO ally from taking it. This isn't a deterrent, it's a potential flashpoint. And it reveals something most people don't understand about how alliances actually work under pressure. Picture this, German soldiers standing on Greenlandic soil. American troops move in. What happens next? Do Germans fire on Americans? Does NATO invoke Article 5 against itself? Nobody knows. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes it dangerous. The military positioning story is real. Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic is increasing. Melting ice is opening new strategic corridors. But those facts don't explain why Trump needs to own Greenland rather than simply reinforce the base he already controls. The answer lies beneath the ice, in resources that have been locked away for millennia and are now becoming accessible as temperatures rise. The trillion-dollar illusion. Resource-rich territories are usually resource-cursed for the people who live there. Greenland's about to find out why. The headlines make Greenland sound like a gold mine. 31 billion barrels of oil equivalent in hydrocarbons. 40 million tons of rare earth elements, dysprosium and neodymium, enough to satisfy a quarter of future global demand. The entire green transition depends on these minerals. The Kvanefjeld deposit alone is one of the world's largest rare earth reserves. These aren't obscure minerals, they're the building blocks of EV batteries, wind turbines, military technology. China controls 70% of global rare earth processing. Beijing can throttle supply whenever it wants, and there's almost nothing the West can do about it. Greenland could theoretically break that monopoly. Theoretically. But there's a reason China's been trying to invest in Greenland for a decade and keeps getting blocked. And it's not just geopolitics. Greenland has rare earths. So does Australia. So does Vietnam. So does Canada. The difference? Those countries have roads to their mines. They have ports. They have workers who don't need to be flown in from Denmark. Greenland has ice. Lots of it. The numbers sound massive. The strategic implications seem obvious. And that's the problem. Resource-rich doesn't mean economically viable. Greenland's terrain makes mining absurdly expensive compared to simply importing from China. There are no roads connecting mining sites to ports, no ports capable of handling industrial-scale extraction, no processing facilities. Everything must be built from scratch in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Every piece of equipment, every worker, every supply shipment faces extreme weather, vast distances, and logistical nightmares that multiply costs exponentially. But here's what the economists and geopoliticians keep missing. Greenlanders don't want their island turned into a mining colony. They've said it clearly, they've voted on it. They've banned uranium mining specifically to prevent it. The Kvanefjeld project, the one that was supposed to prove Greenland's mineral wealth was accessible, ran straight into local opposition. The Inuit Ataqatigiit Party, currently in government, represents communities that don't want their land destroyed for foreign profit. In 2021, Greenland banned uranium mining. That single decision killed the Kvanefjeld project despite its massive potential. Greenlanders decided they didn't want radioactive waste in their backyard. 85% of Greenlanders oppose US takeover. The people who live there, the ones whose land would be mined, have already decided. Melting ice is exposing these resources, but developing them accelerates the climate crisis that's melting the ice in the first place. The green transition requires rare earths. Extracting those rare earths from Greenland would undermine the transition's environmental goals. Denmark sends 530 million euros annually to keep Greenland's economy functioning. That number is about to double under new EU budget plans. Greenland's GDP depends heavily on fishing and Danish subsidies, not mineral wealth. If Greenland's resources were actually viable, companies would already be there. They're not. Chinese firms attempted multiple investments over the past decade. Denmark and the US blocked them every time, citing security concerns. But even Chinese companies, who can operate at lower costs than Western competitors, haven't found a way to make Greenland's resources profitable. 70% of Greenlanders want independence from Denmark. But independence requires money. Money requires resource extraction. Resource extraction requires foreign partners with capital. Foreign partners with capital want control. So Greenlanders face an impossible choice: stay dependent on Denmark or trade one colonial relationship for another. But there's a third option emerging, and it's reshaping the entire Arctic. The EU just committed to doubling its Greenland spending to 530 million euros by 2028, specifically for mining infrastructure. That's Europe saying, we can give you independence without selling your soul to America. But it's a race against time. Trump knows it, so does Beijing. The independence trap is simple. Freedom costs money, money requires selling resources. Selling resources means accepting foreign control. It's the same colonial dynamic that's played out across the developing world for centuries, just frozen in ice instead of buried in jungle. The trillion-dollar claim is real in the sense that the resources exist. It's an illusion in the sense that no one has figured out how to extract them profitably, sustainably, or without destroying the communities that live there. So if the resources aren't actually accessible, what's really driving this? The answer lies in power, not economics. The real game being played. The paradox nobody wants to admit. The US already has everything it needs from Greenland. Under a 1951 agreement with Denmark, Washington has unlimited military access. It can bring as many troops as it wants, build whatever bases it needs, and operate without restriction. Base control, Arctic positioning. The treaty gives Washington everything except the paperwork. So why does Trump need to own it? Because owning it means paying for it. And that's the real problem. Trump's strategy isn't about buying Greenland, it's about forcing Denmark's hand. The easy way or hard way threat isn't negotiation, it's economic coercion. Trump doesn't need to invade, he just needs to make Denmark's position untenable until Copenhagen agrees to expanded American control. Meanwhile, in Nuuk, Greenlanders are watching this unfold. They called a snap election specifically because of Trump's pressure. Every party leader, including the opposition, issued a joint statement. We do not want to be Americans. That's not political theater, that's a people saying no. The election is a referendum on how to respond to American pressure, and the answer is already clear. Greenlanders are choosing their own future, not waiting for Washington or Copenhagen to decide it for them. But here's the distinction. Trump doesn't need to own Greenland to get what he wants. He just needs to make Denmark think he does. What Trump actually wants: expanded base access beyond the 1951 agreement, resource development rights that bypass Greenlandic and Danish approval, and veto power over any Chinese investment in the Arctic. He wants Denmark to remain the legal owner while America gets operational control. Denmark faces an impossible position. It's the sovereign owner of Greenland, but lacks the military power to defend it and the capital to develop it. The country pays 530 million euros annually to maintain Greenland, but loses control over strategic decisions the moment Washington applies pressure. The subsidy creates leverage. Denmark funds Greenland's welfare state, but that dependence doesn't translate to loyalty. 85% of Greenlanders oppose US takeover. The independence movement creates the opening Trump needs. Greenlanders don't want to be Danish, but they can't afford sovereignty without money. Trump's pitch is simple. We'll flood you with American cash if you join us. The EU countered by doubling its Greenland spending to 530 million euros by 2028, focusing specifically on mining infrastructure. The message is clear. If Greenland can achieve independence through European investment, it won't need to sell itself to America. But here's what nobody's saying. This isn't about Greenland choosing its future. It's about who controls the Arctic in 2050. Russia and China are watching closely. If the US takes Greenland unilaterally, it sets precedent for their own territorial claims. Moscow could justify seizing Arctic islands. Beijing could push harder in the South China Sea. The international order that's held since World War II starts cracking. NATO faces a fracture risk. European allies publicly oppose Trump's threats while privately calculating their own Arctic strategies. France and Germany floated the idea of deploying troops to Greenland as a deterrent. That's not about defending Denmark. It's about preventing American unilateralism from destroying the alliance. Greenland called a snap election specifically because of Trump's pressure. The vote isn't just about domestic politics. It's a referendum on how to respond to American demands. Every party leader, including the opposition, issued a joint statement. We do not want to be Americans. We do not want to be Danes. We want to be Greenlanders. What to monitor: Rubio-Denmark negotiations, EU infrastructure commitments, Chinese Arctic shipping activity, Greenland's election results, and whether NATO increases its Arctic presence without American pressure. But here's what really matters. In the next 18 months, we'll see whether Trump actually moves on Greenland or whether the costs and complications force him to back down. And that answer will tell us something fundamental about how power works in 2026. Greenland's value isn't in what's extractable today. It's in controlling tomorrow's Arctic shipping routes and military positioning. The trillion-dollar claim is real, but so are the trillion-dollar costs and complications. Trump's aggression reveals the truth. When resources become strategic necessities, sovereignty becomes negotiable. The contrarian reality? Greenland might be more valuable to the US as a Danish territory with unlimited base access than as an expensive new state. Subscribe if you want to track the power plays hiding behind the headlines.